Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the TPCelitist. My name is Woodsie, and I'm just doing a quick intro because we are posting the roundtable discussion we were invited to do with True PC Gaming. So it's a long roundtable. I'll let you get into it. Phil from True PC Gaming will do all the introductions, so I hope you guys enjoy. Thank you.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the True PC Gaming Podcast. As usual, this is Phil Cordaro giving a weird little intro. Adam the Animal Ames is here, but muted for the duration of this show, a point I will explain shortly. Because today is a roundtable about sort of our memories with old school PC gaming and our experiences with all this old stuff and how we got into gaming in the first place. And we have a whole circle of guests who have been on the show before and we had a lot of fun with. And I'll sort of start by introducing them one by one. So first off, from the ThePCelitist, you might remember them from one of our very early shows. We had a lot of fun together, and those guys have sort of grown right alongside us, and it's really a pleasure to have them back on. So please welcome Woodsie and Shepherd. I know I said I'd introduce you individually, but you guys get double credit.
We come in a pair, so
yeah. It's a package deal. Glad to be on. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no worries. Next, we have someone whose silky smooth voice and PR-sounding voice and velvety, I believe it was referred to by the TPCelitist. Another friend of the show, somebody who does a great series of YouTube videos on lazy game reviews. Clint Basinger is also here.
Yeah, greetings. Good to be on again.
Oh, that voice and that beard. Majestic.
Beard, yes. Bigger than ever.
Bigger than ever. And finally, we're joined by the head of PR and marketing for Good Old Games. You might remember we had another great conversation with him about that site and kind of got into a lot of the details of Trevor Longino. I hope I got that right again.
You did indeed this time.
Oh, excellent. Oh, yeah, last time I got it wrong, didn't I?
You did indeed, but I didn't hold it against you. It's a weird Americanization of an Italian name, so whatever.
Yeah, but I'm Italian, so there's no... I mean, my last name's Cordaro, so I've got no excuse. So on that note, we have a sort of series of general questions and topics that we want people to share their experiences in. Since we have so many people, I'm going to try to kind of go down the list individually, refer to people one by one, but we'll probably get into some conversations and discussion points about this stuff. So just so we don't get too bogged down in introducing each other, which I guess we already have, I'll hop right into a introduction question, which is about how we got started, right? Our first experiences playing a PC game, what maybe started to get us down the road of becoming PC gamers, of getting into the hobby. So, like I said, I'll start with, do you answer the questions in a pair, or do I...
Well, we are a package deal. We could not be more different.
Right.
And I'll start with Woodsie. What do you think?
I have to say that probably I got started with games with old adventure games. One of my earliest gaming memories, I think, besides Atari days, I don't think we're counting Atari, but when I was playing, anyone remember Robin Hood, Conquest of the Longbow?
Oh, that game was awesome.
That game was awesome, okay? That gave me my love for, I think, the narrative of video games. That it could be told in such a personal way. I mean, you felt like Robin Hood after you played that game, and I was 7, so I was already shooting people on the street with bows and arrows. But I think that game was one of my biggest influences. I moved on to like Monkey Island, the X-Wing series, but those are like my starts. That's where I kind of started my PC gaming, career with I think old adventure games. And that's one of my earliest memories. Maybe Night Shift was even earlier, which we brought up pre-discussion. We'll get back to it, but
brought it up, but nobody knew it besides you, I guess. Which is
that there's someone from Good Old Gaming here and doesn't know Night Shift. This game has lost to obscurity.
We have the brightest minds in video gaming at this moment in the industry.
Exactly. So. My heart of gaming probably stems from adventure game style games, and that Robin Hood game was one of my earliest games.
All right. Really nice sort of starting pedigree. I will make a sort of general point that I guess if at any point, I know I said I'm trying to keep some control on this, but if at any point somebody says something interesting or asks, hey, do you know this game? I mean, feel free to interject, you other guys. Next, I'll toss it over to Shepherd.
Thank you very much. The very first game I ever played on PC, I can't even remember the name, but I can describe it eloquently. It was on a floppy disk. That's all you need to know about the time period here. It was a submarine game that really was meant to teach you math. So you had to move the submarine through the ocean and adjust the ballast tanks to get from one point to the other to rise or dive. So that was my first experience, and it was putting that floppy disk in and worrying that it would snap. Was my introduction to the game. And that was coming from also playing on NES when you had a thick cartridge that you could not kill that thing.
Right.
It wasn't Operation Neptune by any chance, was it? Because
I think that is exactly what it was called.
Impressive. All
similar.
right.
Yeah, I have the box behind me over here, and yeah.
No, but Night Shift, no one knows that. Come on.
I said the words Operation Neptune. I had this upswell of emotion from within me. So that was my first experience, but a lot of my other first experiences in terms of games I played more often, not adventure games so much, but obviously Wolfenstein 3D. I don't think there's any young man on the planet who has not at one time played that game. Doom in the early 90s.
Demo.
Yeah,
The demo.
Doom, the very formative game in my life. That was when you're so young and that game is so violent and gory. Doom
And awesome.
Yeah, Doom, Duke Nukem, for sure. Want to give a shout out to Mega Race, which is one of my absolute favorites because it had the video of that old crusty guy who would kind of prep you for each race. And then really two of the games that were my first addictions for PC gaming, and I'll talk about them later when we discuss favorite PC games. One was TIE Fighter. That was my first addiction of any kind, and I absolutely loved that game. And also Raptor Call of the Shadows, if you remember. It was a top...
Oh, dude, that game was the best.
That game, to me, was the first experience in big, dumb fun because the explosions were so much larger than was necessary. The final ship, and you're fighting against a capital ship that has no reason being off the ground.
Right.
Just mechanically speaking, in terms of,
Michael Bay involved in that?
I think he may have been. For me, my foundation of PC gaming was more action and FPS games, and they were and I remember them being violent, and I usually had to play them at friends' houses because my parents didn't want me playing them.
Tisk tisk.
Yep.
Oh, that's some brilliant stuff. I'm already on an incredible nostalgia trip, and we're going to continue down this road. Clint, I'm sure you have some absolutely fascinating answers to this question.
Yeah, well, the first two that I started out with, because I can't really separate them in my mind, they happened like at the same time, was Commander Keen, Invasion of the Vorticons, and Crystal Caves. Also, both of those were just by Apogee, so lots of Apogee shareware just starting off. And, kind of graduated from there to their other platformers, Duke Nukem 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And a little bit of Monster Bash and things like that. Cosmos Cosmic Adventures. So pretty much if it was a platform they put out, a platform game, I wanted it. And I found it.
Commander was amazing.
Commander Keen was rad. Yeah, it was good stuff. I mean, I had all of them. I got Goodbye Galaxy, and then Keen Dreams. I remember when I found that at some random store. It's like, what the frick is this? Doesn't exist. It's not from Apogee. What? I thought it was some ripoff, but it was cool.
Not from Apogee. That's not worth playing.
Yeah, I know. It's soft disk. Who is this?
I was gonna say using the word rad is perfectly anachronistic for the time at which that game came out.
Exactly. It was a rad game. Rad days. It's rad stuff. So yeah, and then I guess the one that really started getting me into, I don't know, opened my mind to other games was Out of This World. And I don't know, when I got that, it was like all the cartoony stuff of Apogee was just left behind. This was like a movie. It was an experience. That was just awesome. So I don't know.
I remember playing. I played that on an SNES though. I remember playing Out of This World, and
it doesn't count.
I know it doesn't count. I remember playing Flashback though. That was on PC, right?
Yeah,
was,
Flashback was also
Flashback.
on all of them.
Yeah. Okay. I can't believe I remember.
Yeah, those were great. I was a big fan of those. I guess in general, those rotoscope, like the original Prince of Persia games, are like that too. Those rotoscope platforming games I always found really kind of weirdly charming, even though they were so punishing. It was really awesome. Now, many of these games we're discussing here can be found on goodoldgames.com, GOG.com. You might want to go check it out.
Hey, shameless plug for me. I appreciate it.
Many opportunities.
Segue,
so speaking of which, Trevor, perhaps you'd like to take this opportunity to discuss some of your favorites or some of your starting out games, which are, I'm sure, available at goodoldgames.com as well.
You know, I'm gonna take that as a head fake because we talk about the first games I played. I grew up in Gainesville, Florida, right next to the University of Florida, and so a lot of the games I played were games that somebody did on comp sci for whatever their graduate program work was, and no one else in the world has played them because they were sold in Ziploc bags that 8 people bought.
So you have the most cred out of the most like hipster PC gaming cred out of everybody then.
Yeah, because I was playing Commodore 64 games like the Gumball Machine, and I'm like, that was an awesome game, and everyone's like, what? Or I talked about, man, Jet Boot Jack was phenomenal. And they're like, what?
Sorry for you, because they thought you were saying you literally played a Gumball Machine and you thought it was a PC game.
I had the vending machine the other day. That was the best game ever. It was candy bars.
They had Coke, Pepsi, candy bars.
I put in $1, I win every time.
Right. A true player reward system.
Yeah,
those vending machines.
It's like microtransactions for the win. So I started in Commodore 64 with games like there was a cartridge game of Star Trek with ASCII graphics. I remember that. There was just random weird games, but on PC, like on the actual IBM system, the very first game I played was Heroes Quest, back when it was actually Heroes Quest, before they changed the name. We got a 286 and MS-DOS, I think 6.0 and Heroes Quest all at the same time. I remember sitting down with my brother and looking at the box art where you've got this guy with this bent-ass sword looking at a red dragon. And I'm like, oh, dude's going to have a bad day.
Yeah, you've got me thinking of all that really janky high fantasy box art on games like Stormlord and stuff that just looked horrible back in like the 80s and early 90s. That's some great stuff. I mean, for me, it's a lot of similar stuff. Most of the games you brought up were near and dear to my heart in the same era. Like I played a ton of that Apogee stuff on PC, and yeah, when I first got a gaming PC, it was Cosmo and Duke Nukem, the platformer, and that kind of stuff. But Trevor mentioned another point that is sort of related to our next question that maybe dates us a little bit. But what would you say is your first kind of gaming PC, right? So we all have some idea of the amazing technology we were dealing with in the era. Woodsie, again, you're the top guy apparently, so you go first.
Well, my gaming career started with my family. My dad was the guy who was into PCs. He never gamed. He always got annoyed that I'd fill his hard drive with these stupid games. I remember him
You filled his 100 megabyte hard drive?
Yeah. I remember him looking at the full install on MechWarrior 2 and seeing 42 megabytes and just going, no, it's not gonna. And so that's how I grew up. So all of my gaming rigs were not really rigs; they were just cannibalized versions of the old computers in the house.
Absolutely.
I didn't actually go out and really investigate hardware and determine what I wanted to buy until later in life when Crysis was coming out, and I was so excited about that game. And you had to like DirectX 10, I think, was coming out with it. I thought it was a good time to buy a new PC. Though even still, I had it in an old tower with just a house fan blowing inside of it. That's
how we all started.
Yeah, but that was my first where I bought everything except for the tower.
So how long did the house fan cooled computer last?
It lasted far too long, and I finally bought like my last rig I built. About last year or 2 years ago, I've got a nice cooling tower, full size, the whole shebang.
Okay, call it a cooling tower. It's like a server rack.
It's enormous. Yeah. So that's the first time I've ever done that. But my first gaming rig when I was younger, a gaming rig was anything that had a video card in it. Like, that was my opinion of a gaming rig, That's
anything that was, like, above the Cirrus Logic cards that they used to come with.
Integrated graphics? Wow.
So, wow, ATI Rage Pro, that's 4 megs of action.
Right. I getting my first Voodoo card when we were playing Counter-Strike around that era. So, yeah, I mean, it goes back further than that. But I remember asking questions like, what's the difference between 8 megabytes of RAM and 4? And my brother just tell me, it's better. I'm like, okay.
You shut up.
I think you bring up an interesting. If anybody else wants to answer the question the same way, feel free. Like maybe your first PC in general and your first gaming PC. Because when I think back, it's similar to me. I have sort of 2 different angles to answer the question from. What about you, Shepherd? What was your story?
Yeah, that's actually how I was planning to answer. Technically, the first gaming PC was my parents' computer, and my parents were not at all technical. I wasn't raised technical. I had to go to school hard knocks to learn get all my hardware chops. But so it was whatever PC they had, and I don't remember what the specs were, but I do remember, and I know you all will probably remember this as well, walking through CompUSA or wherever you were going to buy a game, before you even looked at what kind of game it was or if it would be interesting, the first place you look are the minimum requirements on the back.
Right.
And I remember being afraid. You'd say, "Oh God, 256 megabytes of RAM." It's gonna be tough. So I remember those days very fondly. The first time when I left for college, this was actually 2004. I bought a very robust laptop, not with gaming in mind, but I wanted something that would last me throughout college. It turned out to be beefy enough to play World of Warcraft and Battlefield 1942 on pretty decent settings. And so that's when I first got into WoW. First got into the Battlefield series. But it wasn't until about 2006 I bought a custom-built Dell. I ordered it online, configured it online, and I still didn't know a great deal about hardware, so I made a lot of cost-benefit analyses to make those decisions. But the problem with that machine, that lasted me about 2 years. But because of the way Dell uses their proprietary towers and everything, and proprietary sized motherboards, I couldn't modify it at all. I tried to put in a new video card. It was about 3 inches too long for the inside of the chassis.
I've had exactly the same experience, or the power supply's not big enough, and you can't replace the power supply because it's also a proprietary size and all this just crazy stuff.
Well, one other thing I remember learning about, not until years later, I was studying for the CompTIA Plus certification, and they mentioned that some Dell power supplies have different pinouts, and so if you use the wrong power supply or plug it in the wrong motherboard, you can actually fry everything, which was delightful. But yeah, so that lasted me for about 2 or 3 years, and Woodsie was with me when I tried to open that tower up and put some additional gear in there. He said, you need a bigger tower. This is not going to work.
Yeah.
And that's when I started getting into, for the last, 5 years now? Actually 7 years. That's when I started really getting into building my own machines. And the rig I have now, it's been a work in progress. Rather than save up and buy a completely new rig from scratch, I just keep replacing what the oldest piece is. Mm-hmm. So I think that feels, I have more of a story. So I'll look and say, oh, this is the last piece from my original build. It's hard to see. So that's my story.
Yeah, that's great to hear that the sentimental value of building a device piece by piece.
Yeah.
Clint, what about you starting out on PC gaming?
First was, of course, the family computer. The first one that we got was a Packard Bell. It was a 486, I think 33 megahertz, and definitely no more than 4 megs of RAM. And I specifically remember the video card being just VGA, and it was by Trident. And I remember thinking it was crap because it was a chewing gum brand. So I was like, what is this chewing gum video card? Wouldn't even let me play SimCity 2000. So anyway, that was the first one. So, and then after that, we had a couple other random things, Acers and Compacts. The first gaming one, though, I guess was the Acer. Had AMD K6, and I upgraded it with a couple things, some more RAM. Took it up to, I think, 32 megs, and a 12 megabyte Voodoo 2 card, which was amazing. Yeah. And, so that didn't really start getting into building the whole gaming PC thing until like Doom 3 and Half-Life 2 came out, 2004 or so. So at that point, I started building them completely from the ground up, from scratch, and that's kind of where I am today. I'm just continually upgrading however often is needed, which is less in recent years, but still.
Yeah. All right, how about you, Trevor?
Man, I feel like the grumpy old man at the high school party here.
Ah, yes, back in the 086 computer.
Yes.
No, seriously, my first PC that ran like an IBM PC was a 286, I think 66DX with the turbo button. And I never knew why any idiot would turn the turbo button off, because it went faster with the turbo button on. I'm like, who would ever turn the turbo off? Why do you not want to go turbo?
That's because starving children in Singapore are working hard to make sure that turbo works correctly.
I suppose. But it's like a car where you're burning up more gasoline. It's a computer, and particularly those old ones. It was like a 600-watt power supply for the crappy little 286 processor anyway.
That's a lot of power for that machine.
Yeah, well, they were so inefficiently, compared to today, so inefficiently designed.
That's true.
Yes, this had less processing power than my cell phone does now, but consumed more power in a minute than it does all week.
I imagine even up to this point, Trevor looks at his computer looking for the turbo button.
Yeah, he's like, why don't they have turbo buttons anymore? That was awesome.
I wish they still did.
Yeah. Yeah, they tried to sell them on the Core i7. You have turbo boost technology. No, I want a button.
I prefer
How
a
do
switch.
I know it's not turbo mode if there's not...
Yeah, just give them like a big electrical switch, like a big wall switch. That would be
exactly. Yes.
Like a big Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Exactly. So my first PC was 286. As far as building a gaming PC, I'm not convinced I've ever built a gaming PC. My folks, my parents were very patient with their two nerdy kids. They upgraded the 286 to the 386 and the 386 to the 486. And then I remember the whole big switch to the Pentium. And then there was a video card too, which was a big change. I never had one before then. And I ran, I think it was Unreal Tournament, and there were reflections, and my mind was blown because this is like real life.
Games will never look as good as this, ever.
I know.
I remember feeling that every time a new game came out. This is it. We've reached the pinnacle.
Yes.
Yeah, this is as realistic as real life, period.
Yeah.
That's it.
I played Mad 99 on PlayStation 2, I think, or PlayStation 1. I thought, they have blades as arms. That's the best we're going to get. To puncture the football.
I remember thinking Daikatana was the best thing I'd ever seen, and
Oh man, come on, Clint. What are you doing?
Well, it looked pretty good in those previews,
Classic Clint. Unbelievable.
I do actually. I this weird thing in my mind. Like I upscale the graphics in my head from older games. Like all the Leisure Suit Larry games to me look like Leisure Suit Larry 7. But then for some reason, every RPG I play, even the new ones, downscale in my head and look like Baldur's Gate. That makes no sense.
Well, I did that when I bought Red Faction Guerrilla. I went back and I wanted to play the first Red Faction, and I went back and I thought, no, something happened. They changed the game. It did not look this bad.
Right. I remember thinking like that geomod technology, like, wow, this is completely mind-blowing. Everything falls apart so realistically, and it was just these big, like, hexagon-shaped, like, janky holes.
Yeah, it looked like big, foam blocks that were like a piece of the crag. The aggro crag.
I have to admit, when it comes to actually owning a PC, I was pretty late to the game. I mean, I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, and I remember my neighbor had one of those old Tandy PCs, and we used to play some of those like Scorched Earth and stuff like that at his house. And my school used to have those old like Apple IIes with the monochrome green monitors that I used to play like Number Munchers and stuff like that on. But I didn't actually own a PC until the early Pentium days. A Pentium 133 in something like 95 was my first machine that I actually owned. So I had pretty decent. I was able to play Doom and stuff without having to worry about upgrading my computer. But like Trevor, I also feel like as far as a gaming PC, I didn't have one until probably the PC I have now. Because, I mean, my parents were also cool. They let me upgrade the computer all the time, and I used to get them from the retailers, from Dell and Compaq and all those types. But I feel compared to the machine I have now, which I customized all the parts myself, all those other machines were not really gaming machines, just sort of standard machines that maybe were marketed as gaming. Like if you go to Gateway site and they're like, oh yes, it's our gaming special, and it's just maybe they throw in a slightly better video card or something. But that's what it was like for me. Maybe I feel a little spoiled now. I never had to deal with the 286 x86 that couldn't do anything. Okay, so I'll take that as a segue into our next point, which is about sort of specific games, and there might be some diverging opinions on this because it's not really about objective facts so much as it is about what you've maybe observed as far as the evolution of games, where they're going, where they've come from. So if you think back to stuff that you were playing in the 80s and 90s, what games stand out to you as being really influential and that you can really see other games adapting elements of that later on or today? So, Woodsie, as usual, I'll start out with you.
Well, I think that obviously there's a lot of series that have extended till today. I mean, if you're going by just purely games that affect today's games, you take the Elder Scrolls series. I mean, it's just one of the biggest RPGs today. And that goes back, when did the first Elder Scrolls game come out? That's way back. So that is a huge influence on today's gaming community. Obviously, the FPS is just massive, just influence on how you display, how you put a game together. I think that today's games take more story-driven elements, even though our games today might not have the best stories. But I think
or any story.
Or any story. They really have a story.
In the case of Hard Reset, no story.
If you go back to early PC games, I mean, some games were just like an adventure game was almost purely narrative. So that was a huge part of a lot of PC gaming, and a lot of console gaming was more platformer based. What was the storyline to Kid Icarus? Did it matter? No one. It was just.
It was the eggplant wizard and the captured the. I don't know. Something.
They had great story. They had story elements for sure, but I think PC gaming was really kind of this. It was almost like a read your own adventure book. Sometimes the complexities of the storylines, and I think as those two things merged, there was kind of an upgrade to what console gamers, especially, which were the mass market, were used to have these very strong narratives. So I think like Elder Scrolls is one I would say has some of the biggest influence, because I think today's gamer, we're kind of used to it as PC gamers to have an RPG where you would sit around, talk to townsfolk, do that whole thing. And that's a much bigger part of gaming today than I think it was in, gaming past.
Yeah, I can definitely see where you're going with that. I hadn't thought about the question from the perspective of maybe seeing how genres influenced each other, right? And how games that combined story-heavy stuff with mechanics that maybe were less involved with stories in previous games would really make an impact later on. So I think that's an A+ answer from you. Shepherd, what about you? You're competing, so let's get something good.
I don't know how I can follow that, but
you better.
There's really only one thing that kind of stands out to me, and this, my prerequisite to this is just a small sample size, just in my own experience from games from the 90s, because the games I listed at the top comprise the bulk of the games that I played in the 90s. Just because my parents wouldn't really buy games for me, so it was either I had to play what my friends had, or I had the games I somehow convinced them to get me, and I just played them all the time. But one thing that really sticks out to me, and it's primarily from the work that Blizzard did with the first StarCraft and then Diablo. I played the first StarCraft a lot, and then I observed my cousin play Diablo endlessly, though I never really played it myself, was just the depth of the lore surrounding the game. One of my
that was crazy. I remember that huge instruction manual with detailed explanations of everything. It was awesome.
One of my biggest parts of nostalgia of older games was the little insert that came with the CD when you bought it, or even the booklet that came with the first StarCraft. It's its own like mini fantasy novel. I love opening it up and reading about all of the what kind of enemies you're going to face, and they give you a little paragraph about this enemy. They give you some backstory and what his strengths and weaknesses are, and just particularly with StarCraft, it made the universe so much more believable and real, and something you wanted to jump into, knowing that there was that depth, as opposed to a game where you don't know the backstory. They try and rush and explain it so quickly in some cinematic events in the very beginning, and the world doesn't feel lived in. It doesn't give me this, I want to hop in and be part of this huge scale. And so that's what I kind of miss about games from the 90s that I played, was that just the depth of the lore, and you feel like here was something they didn't create just for you. Here's something that was created, and they're saying, hey, we have this big, robust world. Do you want to come check it out? I didn't feel like I was being sold something.
Very, very interesting answer, but you went a little bit off topic, so I give you a C- on that.
The judge is pretty harsh here.
Harsh but fair. Clint, what about you?
I don't know. I mean, a couple things sort of come to mind. This is pertaining to PC gaming, and although what I'm thinking of isn't necessarily all PC gaming, but if you think back to how many of these weird little shareware titles came out, or even stuff from people like Sierra, and Dynamics, the Incredible Machine, for instance, you see all these kind of very similar things coming out today, just for Flash games, Facebook games, some on PC, but a lot of mobile stuff too. That really, really remind me of that. And really the whole indie game scene, I mean, that's exploding right now with PC gaming, especially now that they're coming to Steam. I think that's really interesting. Whether or not they know that that's an influence of all this older stuff or not, it is, at least in my mind. I mean, I'm seeing games that are so similar to these weird old games that I played that are coming out now as an indie game with just a slightly fresh coat of paint or a little bit different of a tweak to it. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's really interesting to watch this happen. It's like seeing, the shareware explosion happen again.
The Facebook games are kind of it's like deja vu. Like I saw this before, the Sim City type games and such like that.
Yeah, you got Farmville and everything that looks a lot like some of the, you take elements of Sim Farm and a bunch of other things, and there you go, you end up with that. All these physics-based games, it looks like the Incredible Machine all over again, some of them. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's great. I thought of the same thing. A lot of these simple physics puzzlers coming out now that are so popular are very reminiscent of games like The Incredible Machine all those years ago. So another very, very fine answer. Shepherd, really lagging behind here. I'm very disappointed. No, I'm kidding. This has been really great stuff so far. So, Trevor, you have a lot to meet up with. So don't be a failure like Shepherd. Get something interesting.
I have an oddball answer for you, which is, I think, one of the most formative games actually that influences PC gaming nowadays is Ultima Underworld 1 and 2.
Oh.
And I have very good reasons for it. Let's look at what happens with Ultima Underworld. This is 2 years after Doom. And someone says, I'm going to do a first-person shooter, but I'm going to completely mess with your mind as for your expectations of what's going to happen here. You're going to have actual fully 3 axes, 6 degrees of freedom, where you can move up and down as well as horizontally. I'm going to give you a story. I'm going to give you a world. I'm going to give you a rich inventory. I'm going to give you very different puzzles to solve. There's this intricate magic system. And what you see from there is both RPGs now suddenly go, oh, hey, you can do this. And then you start to see Battlespire Arena and Daggerfall and Redguard and the Elder Scrolls games. And you also start to see FPSs go, oh, I can tell story. And you see Half-Life, and you see other games that are focusing on, let's take the first-person perspective and let's not just do Marines killing aliens. Let's actually put a story in there. Let's go and look at System Shock. Let's put a evil deity in here that plays with the rules of the game while you play it. I mean, you start to see all kinds of crazy experiments happen, and it starts with the team who did Ultima Underworld who said, let's take your expectations for an FPS and just blow your mind.
Damn it, Trevor has to go and sweep in with the best possible answer, so we all feel like failures in comparison. I was actually thinking that I was going to go with System Shock 2 because it's just topical and be like, aha. But I think you're absolutely right. That early stuff that Looking Glass had done was clearly just tremendously influential in the sort of development of these hybrid RPGs, hybrid first-person games that, since first-person became so popular, we're seeing much more of these days. But man, back then it was mind blowing to see stuff like that. So
I
brilliant
playing Ultima Underworld and just like my brain blew open and never quite shut again. What they did and all of this, so many things that nobody had done before and you didn't see again for 8 years. And then someone else brings it up and I'm like, I remember that. Wow, it took you a long time to get back to that, didn't it?
You know what reminds me of is when I first played the Magic Carpet series.
Oh,
sure. That game did a lot of stuff, terraforming and a magic system and resource control and map control and combat. It did so many things well, which is so rare to have just all these elements put into one game. do it in a spectacular way.
It's funny to think back, some of those early hybrid games, we appreciated them at the time and obviously acknowledged them to be such great games, but it's kind of mind-blowing looking back on just how ahead of their time some of these games were. Like, that nobody else could even come close to capturing such a fine mix of elements, or nobody even tried until 8-10 years later on some of these games. So it's really nuts thinking about.
Bullfrog had a nice little streak of games like the Dungeon Keeper series where they
I was going to mention that.
They did really well. They were kind of like a comment to me in my gaming career. It's like, Bullfrog, they're amazing, and then they were gone.
Yeah, and then things. Well, some very fine memories though. Populous and Dungeon Keeper and Magic Carpet, really really great.
Now that you're mentioning some of these, one that kind of came to mind on the Atari ST was Hunter. And that was sort of this open sort of sandbox thing. And it actually had 3D graphics back in 1991. Supposedly some of the influence of games like Far Cry and GTA actually took from this. I mean, you have a world, you walk around in 3D, you can swim, you can jump in vehicles and tanks and go around and it was freaking wild.
Yeah, that's like stuff you literally didn't see until 10 years later. People were even trying to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the zany ambition of older games. It brings us to maybe a little bit more of a downer point, but this is something that we see a lot of discussion on in forums and gaming website about how games have sort of dumbed down, and I use dumbed down in quotation marks, so to speak, since that kind of late 80s, early 90s age of ingenuity or whatever. So the next sort of discussion point for you guys, and I'm curious what kind of answers you'll come up with this, but can you think of some ways or maybe even some specific games that fall in line with that line of argument, that idea that games just aren't as ambitious or aren't as smart or aren't as complex as they used to be? And it's pretty open-ended. You can kind of interpret it however you want. So as usual, we'll kick it to Woodsie first.
I have actually kind of an unusual answer, I think, for this question, because I thought about it a lot when you sent the list of kind of subjects. And gaming kind of took a turn, as I talked about in the beginning of the conversation, when consoles and PCs started sharing applications. Now, the term consoleization I have used numerous times, but as you put it in the question, have they been molded for a broader audience? And I think when you get down to the fundamentals, that's exactly what happened. But I think what happened with PC games is PC games kind of had a philosophy of gameplay. And we all understood it, and we all knew it. And when you play a game that is very PC-ish, we all know it. Once we start playing it, man, this feels like a PC game. But there's a philosophy behind that I don't think our community has really dissected and understood. And as games became more commercialized, instead of keeping our gaming philosophy, especially the developers, of what a PC game is, because it was not wholly understood, they started taking on what EA's philosophy is to make a game, what Activision's philosophy is to make a game, what Nintendo's philosophy is to make a game. And it's proven in the pudding, where if you go to any Nintendo game, without me showing you who made it, you know it's a Nintendo game almost instantly because it has a philosophy behind it. But PC games kind of adopted all these other philosophies in order to make it for a broader audience.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It reminds you of this sort of trendy thing that we're seeing a lot in the last few years of taking those games that do still have that kind of old school PC gaming mentality and referring to them as like PC-ass PC games or super PC games or whatever in an almost derisive way.
Right.
But
I think most people could agree that there is that feel. I mean, I see it all the time.
Absolutely.
Like I sat down and was playing FTL, and the graphics are nothing to talk about really, but it feels PC-ish. It just feels kind of rough around the edges, feels good, feels very full, like I could do a lot with this game. I think there is discussion to go into each element of. I've kind of separated it in 3 different categories of like difficulty, immersion, depth. I think a lot of gamers kind of interchange these words to mean the same thing, but they're actually very different. But I think one of the biggest issues, in my opinion, is the overuse of UI. in games.
Oh yeah.
I think it's just used far too often, and it's not. I don't want to say like I know we don't want to be, just like poo-pooing on consoles, but the UIs are required to play on console. You have a lack. You're further away from your television. You have a lack of control with just a controller. So you have to combine things together. And when you combine things together, you have to make them more intuitive. You have to put more UI on the screen. It's just a natural progression of the system itself, of how you're playing it. When you're on PC, you're right in front of your screen. You might have a manual next to you. You could Alt-tab it, look up things. You could use your keyboard. You have more options. So UI is not a necessity. But it's a less immersive experience when you have heavy UI in your face.
Like press R to reload pops up in the middle of the screen when you run out of bullets and stuff.
Well, most duck and cover games that are made for cross-platform, till the end of the game are still going to give you an icon of where you can cover. It'll still going to show you cover here. Where PC games, old PC games, everyone knows you had to read the manual, you had to study, you had to pass the test, then you could play the game.
Yeah, which of course you can argue is very much goes hand in hand. Like if you want to get that broad-based appeal, that's maybe not the best strategy, but at the same time, people who enjoy that, well, their enjoyment suffers. I want to take this opportunity to point out, Adam's not on the podcast, but he is listening in, and he's in the chat and occasionally chastising me. Not so much chastising me, but giving occasional input. And when you started to talk about the UI issues, he went nuts and just started typing yes in all caps over and over again, expressing how much he agrees with you. And I really think it's a good point, and I really think it's something that a lot of people that come from a PC background can really identify with. So very nice job. Again, Shepherd, don't disappoint me this time. Let's get a good answer out of you.
First, I want to point out that when you started that last discussion, you said it's not based on objective fact, and that you used an objective grading scale. So I don't know what the hell you're doing.
No, I'm grading. Allow me to clarify that. The answers are not based on an objective scale. That is to say that any answer can be a right answer, but I'm grading you on how well you justify your answer, much like an English teacher might do in high school.
It feels a bit like a woman is moderating this discussion. No,
that's sexist. Get the hell out.
Yeah, ain't that just like a dame?
Please send your complaints to Shepherd at ThePCelitist.com.
They don't know. I always view this question through a lens of how much of my perspective on this is influenced by the fact that I have just grown and matured. So how is it that I can look back on games that I played when I was younger? And first of all, how much can I remember from them with any kind of real substantive details? And two, is there anything to how I'm thinking back on them now versus how I felt about them when I was actually playing them? Since I haven't played any of them in a long time, I'm just remembering what it was like to play these games through a lens of purely hedonistic, basically a child or young adolescent playing these games. So to me, that always has to factor in. But I think, and Woods and I had the discussion that he kind of just laid out for you last night, and kind of fleshing it out. And I think that he does make a lot of great points. But for me, I think that games that were made in the 80s and 90s, these were guys who loved games and who wanted to make games that they wanted to play, which is always the litmus test for Woodsy. And you can usually tell when you're playing a game, is this something that the developer wanted to play himself? I feel like now, and we did a discussion on this, I think a year ago, and the question was, are MBAs making your games? Really, though developers are obviously the creative driving force behind game generation, how much of it now is kind of a formula for we know how to make money making games, and these are the elements and things you have to have in a game to make it have the broadest mass appeal. And this has been kind of dissected by the industry from a business standpoint. And I think that while that has certainly kind of exploded the market in many ways, it can also be dangerous, because and I don't know, I can't say to the extent that this is happening. I have to defer to developers since they're the ones in the room. But I really wonder, to what extent are developers truly making the decisions that they want to make in the creation of a game? And how are great ideas left on the cutting room floor? To me, that's a process that is kind of nebulous, and I don't really have the answer. But to me, it all kind of circles around that. I just want to know. And that's why I welcome any opportunity to speak with someone. I'm a friend of a friend is a producer at Blizzard who worked on Diablo 3. And I was able to talk to him just very briefly about it. And he said there were so many things they wanted to do with that game that they couldn't. and he didn't want to go into all the reasons, but basically he said what I'm kind of alluding to. So many creative, great ideas for how to make a game that just feels like a PC game were just left out because they didn't think it would appeal, even though Diablo 3 is a PC-only game.
Yeah.
Because, and Call of Duty games like this where it just feels like, they're trying to do so much here.
Right.
So for me, that's kind of what it comes down to. And, I think Woodsie and I, this is a topic that I think all of us, but particularly Woodsie and I, could go on for hours talking about. So I'll cut it.
No, you guys are on a nice little hot streak, I have to say. I'm very impressed. You are once again in my good graces with that response. It really is an interesting point when you think about kind of game design by committee or game design by the suits say this, or research shows that we have to have a multiplayer mode because everybody wants a multiplayer mode or whatever, and how that's kind of diluted a lot of these ideas in games. And you bring up another good point that it's impossible for us to really know how prevalent it is, but I guess because we've seen so much more effort to appeal to the mainstream, to have a larger broad base appeal, you can't help but wonder how much of a large influence something like that might be. So very nice.
Thank you. There were two just quick things I wanted to add at the end. One was,
go ahead.
I think it was Clint, were you talking about the kind of re-emerging indie explosion? I think that that's a great thing that we're seeing, that developers are willing to take chances. But given how expensive it is to make games nowadays, it's harder to take a risk and risk that return on investment for plunging a lot of money and time into a game and not knowing how much it's going to come back to you. And then with regards to some of the more aesthetic and kind of hardware-based elements of a game, for just performance graphics, things like that, the tools are available to optimize these games on these Frostbite 3, these amazing engines to make these games look and feel amazing. But you really would pigeonhole yourself if you only made a game that would appeal to the enthusiast power users. They could make a game where it would require a 4 gigabyte video card. It would require hyper-threading, require all these things, and that game would probably be phenomenal. But your market share would be severely cut down. So I feel like
absolutely.
Just to survive as a business, you can't really take those kind of chances. And I understand that.
I mean, I agree a lot with that. I think it's really smart, and I think that's why we're seeing a lot of what we are seeing in PC gaming development today, and how it tends to get sort of, at least to some extent, hamstrung. Clint, what do you think about this? I know I haven't heard from Clint or Trevor in a while because the PC Elitist guys, got into some great stuff, and we're obviously thankful for that because it was an interesting conversation. But I'll give you a chance to talk now.
Sorry about that.
No, don't be. Clint, what's up?
They actually kind of hit on a couple points that I had thought about. As far as can we, things are dumbed down right now quite a bit, but it's kind of expected if you look at how things are. I mean, could we really expect to have these PC-like AAA crazy games and everything when they do need to hit a certain amount of market appeal just to get people to buy the friggin' thing, so they'll have enough money to recoup to make it worth it to make the next game? So I mean, you have to kind of do that. And as far as the indie game thing, that's great. I also think stuff that like Kickstarter is really trying to or it is actually capturing some of that hasn't been able to be picked up on in recent years. These really enthusiast kind of games, maybe they're not the most graphically advanced, but definitely enthusiast-y kind of things, Wasteland 2, stuff like that are very PC-like, at least it's looking to be, hopefully. So I think it's probably just going to have to be either lower budget or so carefully planned out that, I think you can find a middle ground on some games. I think like Deus Ex Human Revolution did it pretty well, kind of, as far as having a lot of those old school kind of PC ideas, but yet also being a little more relevant, I guess, to the larger market as a whole. So I think a middle ground is somewhere where you'd really have to see things go to make it make sense, just to even back it with money by publishers, if you're going the publisher route.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, maybe there is a lot of hope to be found in that ideal becoming sort of a more trendy indie thing, and getting funding for these projects that maybe if you're Activision, you don't want to fund because you have that philosophy of I need to sell 3 million copies or whatever. So I think you bring up some great stuff there. But before I ramble, I want to kick it to Trevor. What do you think about this, dude?
I'm actually going to argue things from, once again, a slightly different perspective. And I'll start with talking with Woodsie about your user interface. I would point out that some of the greatest games on PC have obnoxious user interfaces. You mentioned MechWarrior, installing MechWarrior 2 on your PC. That game had an atrocious interface. Or Ultima Underworld, a game that I'm a gigantic fan of. You played on a postage stamp-sized area, and 90% of your screen was the paper doll cutout and your inventory and the mana and the spells and everything. What makes a game feel PC-ish to me is a certain Baroque architecture of the control scheme, right? PC has 106 keys. A controller has 12. What you do with the PC is you use all those keys and you make people not just learn how to play the game, but learn how to play the mechanics of making the game work. That's what makes the game feel PC-like. But I would also say Sturgeon's Law, and he's a bit of a curmudgeon, so I think he's a bit overestimating it, but Sturgeon's Law says 95% of everything is crap. So when you're thinking about games like, oh wow, Descent, phenomenal shooter, gives you 3 degrees or 6 degrees of freedom, 6 axes of freedom, whatever it is. For every Descent, there's a Geno, which was really not a very good game. For every MechWarrior, there's a random robot stompy sim game whose name I can't even remember. So what we remember is the best games from those eras. And if we, 10 years from now, look back at gaming in this era, we're going to think of things like Portal, which was a transformative experience. We're going to think of things like the first Dragon Age, which was a phenomenal game. We're going to think of things like some of the other shooters that are happening. I'm not really a shooter fan, but you see things like the Halo series was pretty much perfection of FPS shooting as you can do it. So we're not going to think about all the terrible, World War II shooter number 47. We're not going to remember that one.
Even just the average games, right? They all get lost in the shuffle, and you only remember the best ones. It's classic nostalgia, I suppose. I don't think anyone's going to be talking about Time Shift in 10 years, right?
Phil, I'm pretty sure that Trevor just said that 95% of all of our answers are crap.
Well, yeah, maybe so. I mean, I think he does maybe do that a bit. But I think, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in there because, well, regarding the first point, I do think that there's something of a happy medium there because a lot of those older games that had cumbersome looking and maybe even cumbersome in functionality, I know I could definitely say that of the Ultima Underworld games, even though I loved them. It felt more, I don't know, somehow appropriate. It felt more like it was part of the atmosphere or part of the game or like it complemented it in some way to have all that stuff. Like MechWarrior is one where I feel that's definitely the case. Whereas these days, I feel like a lot of the stuff that games inundate you with is there for the sake of, I don't know, making it easier or something. Does anybody else get that impression or is it just me?
I have an answer for both to Trevor for his comment. We are going to be posting a video where we tackle the subject of immersion and try to come up with a philosophical question that you could ask in order to make a game feel immersive, as if I handed you a game and I say, what do I do to make this more immersive, right? And when I say that UI is a non-immersive element, I don't mean UI is in general, but there's a general rule to it. There's a reason that it's there. Okay, everyone knows that if you have a UI in front of your screen with like Doom, where you have your ammo on the left and your health on the right, okay, that's not an immersive element, but it's an informative element. You need to know that it's there. But when we started getting into these futuristic shooters where all your ammo and stuff looked like it was part of your helmet's design, that it had a user interface in the helmet, that's so immersive. It does the exact same thing, but hey, all of a sudden it's an immersive element, right? When you're playing a game and there's something blinking that tells you could cover over here, that you could duck behind this, that's a non-immersive UI element. So it's not the fact that there is UI, there's functional UI, and then there's non-immersive and immersive UI. And you have to determine the two to kind of get to the bottom of that issue, I think, when you have an overuse of UI. Is this an immersive or non-immersive piece of UI?
Sure, I'd say a piece of user interface that remains relatively unchanged unless affected on by the user becomes, it's like when you browse the internet, you don't see the advertisements, you've gone banner blind. Same idea where the UI is not there until you need it. And I do understand that. But I think part of what makes a game feel like it's a PC game is a good portion of learning to play the game is the game. Learning how to control this complex, overly Baroque piece of steamwork machineria that is actually how you control the game is part of what the game is. You know, when you play X-Wing Alliance, right? As you got your joystick over here, and you still need like 82 of the 106 keys on your keyboard to play it.
Right.
Yeah, because you got your shield and you're bouncing them forward and aft, and then you want to make a turn, but you got to slow down first because you can't turn fast when you're going at full velocity. So you drop your speed to a third, make a turn, fire off a shot, speed back up again so they don't shoot a missile up your ass. I mean, that's the game. Is the control scheme is what feels like a PC game. But I do also understand why. You know, I'm 31 now. My reflexes are garbage. If I were to play those games nowadays, I would die.
I think you make great points there, Trevor.
I think that it's a great point, and I think that speaks to the complexity and the ability for PC games to have that complexity, and thus you get depth with the game. You have great depth with X-Wing Alliance because you have so much complexity of what you could do with your ship, and in the end, once you've learned it all, you can really feel like you're flying an X-Wing. I do feel like I know how to fly an X-Wing. I know how to fly one. You hand it to me, I will fly it. You know, but games can be immersive with a low amount of complexity, and so it's like, how is that explained? And I think, you know, X-Wing, I think it would be more immersive. Not necessarily UI, but when you were pressing keys on your keyboard and you saw your character's hand press them in the X-Wing, you would flip out because that would feel like I'm actually flying this thing more than ever. So, and it has a reason for being. If I'm pressing this button in here, obviously the game would reflect me pressing an X-Wing.
You mean pressing the turbo button?
Pressing the turbo button. PC. So I think there's complexity and then there's immersiveness because we've had both. We've had overly complex games that were not immersive. We've had them that are immersive. We've had very simple games that are very immersive, though not complex. So I think
I'd say a simple game that's immersive and is not complex, you wouldn't say has the PC feel. I do believe that overly ornate feel is part of what makes it required to feel like a PC game. And I'm not sure it's a bad thing that all these games aren't necessarily so complicated anymore because as the gaming audience gets older, having mainstream games that are easier for us to play is good, but there are those indie guys who are making, you know, things like Legend of Eisenwald, which is a Kickstarter game that I backed. It looks to be extraordinarily ornate, but I backed it because it's, okay, you know, Eastern European and Russian developers still like to do things with levels of complexity that make no freaking sense. Yeah. And that's kind of how this game is. But it feels old school that way.
Well, let me actually just make a counterpoint real quick.
All right.
I just want to bring up an example of a game that I think is intensely immersive, though very simplistic to learn, though the game itself is complex, okay? So you're not learning how to play the game, but once you're playing it, is Portal. The game requires very little UI, okay? You have a gun, a portal gun, and that's it. You run around, you walk around, you shoot the portal gun. Now, the puzzles they give you have complexity to them, but no one can deny here that it's not one of the most immersive games anyone has played. It's a very immersive experience, though not very complex in control scheme. So it's a simple control scheme, very little UI going on, extremely immersive and challenging at the same time. So that's my example for that.
I mean, sure, I think sorry, go ahead, Trevor.
I was just going to say, I don't think that necessarily feels like the sort of game when you play it, you go, oh yeah, man, that's a PC game.
I would argue that it is only because when Portal 2 came out, I didn't feel the same way about it.
All right, but I played Portal 1 actually first time ever on an Xbox, and it didn't feel to me like I was straining to control it. And then I played through it again later on my PC, and it didn't feel particularly different. It was a little more precise because obviously the mouse is a better way to control your character. But it didn't feel like, oh, this is a game that's best played on PC.
You know, I think that a lot of this debate is sort of based on, and I'm very excited that we've had a little debate flourish on here. I think a lot of this is based on the perception of what gives you that PC gaming feel. Because for me personally, I'm maybe less in the boat. I understand that I generally consider them to be more complex, but I don't know how much of it really necessarily stems from mechanical complexity to me. One game that I forget who brought it up earlier, and I apologize, but one game that came up earlier was FTL, Faster Than Light, which really gives me that impression, really feels like a PC game, but in terms of its mechanical nature, there's no reason you couldn't play it on, you know, an Xbox or whatever, because you only have to use a couple of buttons. But because of the range of possibilities of things that can happen, it feels very complicated. So I don't always necessarily get that complexity coming from you having to use 80 keys, although I could see how one might think of it that way. So I don't know if what I'm saying makes any sense, but I think part of this is coming from that idea of that maybe Trevor is more of the mind that one of the essential parts of the conceptualization of a PC game is that sort of complexity, that archaic complexity, right? Whereas you guys maybe are thinking of it more in terms of, well, the possibilities that you have, the complexity of your actions within the game.
Your answer
Sure, but
makes sense, but it was about a C- answer.
Yeah, okay. So I'm glad that I could give an answer that both of you thought was bad. So maybe you can at least agree on that.
I think Trevor's reasoning is very sound, so I completely see how he frames the question.
Yeah, I think it's maybe more about disagreement of the question than disagreement of the answer. If that makes sense.
I would argue that FTL is a phenomenally Baroque game, because the way you play FTL, the enjoyment you get from it is learning how to play the rules that make the game. Because it's not a game where you drop in and you just shoot things. That's very evident. It's a game where you have different ships and you have to min-max your builds and min-max your crew. And then eventually, because inevitably it happens, something bursts into flame and you have to all run to the one room and evacuate all together.
I also felt that Baroque was a exceptionally Baroque game. I don't know if any of you guys ever played Baroque. It's neither here nor there. I mean, really, really great stuff. I mean, I in a weird way, I'm agreeing with both of you, so I don't really know how to solve the issue. But I do want to turn the page back a little bit, because earlier on, and this is not a question that we sent around, but I'm curious how you guys feel about it. Earlier on, Clint brought up this point about these little Kickstarters and funding and these indie games that are maybe going down that path of being a little bit more Baroque, being a little bit more complicated. I mean, to Clint or to anybody else, how much do you feel that this could really influence these games in the future, and that we might start to see more of that stuff, more of the PC community maybe embracing that old school feel?
Am I going first again?
This is an open. Yeah, all right, fine. Go ahead.
Well, I remember Shepherd a long time ago, a few years ago, said that he felt like we're having a renaissance of PC games, and I can't think of a better term for it, because I think the crowdfunding and Kickstarter stuff is really bringing out that PC-ishness, back to the games I love. Especially like guys with like Chris Roberts coming back to make a game, a space sim, which I'm so excited about.
Yeah,
and,
Star Citizen is coming to mind through this whole discussion as I'm listening.
Right, and I'm really excited. And what actually made me most excited, that he got the money, he got a lot of money to make this game, is that in his first video where he's explaining it, he goes, this is the game I've always wanted to make. I'm like, I love that you are just saying, I want to make this game, and I want him to make the game he wants to make. I want to play his game. I've actually come to distaste this type of, fund our game and we'll make the game you want to make. That's not really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for your point of view. I like Chris Roberts. I like how you make a game, and I want to play your game, and I don't want you to be overly influenced, but I don't want some George Lucas-like event to happen.
I think that I'm glad Clint brought up the point, because I think it's so important, especially for the near and distant future of the industry. And I think that I have to admit, while I love and fully support Kickstarter, crowdfunding, all of the new business models in indie games, I have not been as diligent as I think I should be in just scrolling through.
Trolling, yeah, like, oh god, this Kickstarter's
scrolling. Scrolling through and just checking it out myself and seeing what kind of games are out there. I was following the development of a game called Blindside, and I haven't followed it in the last couple of months, so I don't know what the status is. It's a completely audio game. There's no visuals at all, and you just have to play the game. It's on Kickstarter right now. I think it gives a description. But To me, I think that the PC gaming community to me is not nearly as sophisticated or mature as I would like it to be, and the big proof for me is reading Metacritic reviews. I think that in life in general, as particularly in America, we love to rail against the kind of the titans of a particular industry, and it's a cool thing to do this indie nonconformist thing just for the sake of it being different. And I'm actually glad the PC community is not saying, oh, we don't like EA or Activision, so we're going to just flood, we're just going to buy all the indie games we can just because they're different and cool and no one's heard of them. I'm glad that we don't have that, like, small for the sake of being small. But I do love that smaller indie developers are being able to take chances and have people truly reward them. Because if you have a developer who's no one's ever heard of, they make a great game, I'll follow you for life. I may not love every game you ever make, but there's that feeling of, oh, I was with them from the beginning. I supported them when they weren't really a big shop. And it gives them the freedom, I think Woodsie touched upon it, to make the game that they want to make. So I really do hope that, and also, like .com, I love that I can go back and find these little gems that I either never played and want to now or used to play. And so I think everything we're going through, this renaissance, is great for the industry. I think there can be nothing but good that comes from it.
Excellent buzz marketing, folks. Remember to check out goodoldgames.com.
Clint, I haven't even marketed my own company yet. You guys do all the work for me.
Exactly. That's what makes this subtle brand of buzz marketing so good. So I expect my check in the mail there, Trevor.
Don't worry,
Clint,
it's in the mail.
Clint, you brought up this point in the first place. I don't know if you had sort of anything else to say about it, but I feel like I should really defer to you here because you were the one that sort of got me down the line of thinking.
Yeah, well, if anything, it's interesting to see all of these things come around on Kickstarter, although a lot of them may fail. But what I'm really interested in is the couple that succeed greatly. Like, we really haven't seen the results of any of these yet, so I'm curious to see if any of them are... Well, FTL, I guess that is. Was that a Kickstarter? I didn't know that. Okay, so there's one. But
there's one.
So there's one. Yeah, so any of these, like Star Citizen, I'm wondering if this does become successful. Like, would that bring about a resurgence in the genre of space sims like that? You haven't seen these in forever. I don't know if it would, but if it were successful enough, it's still gaining money. It's almost like 8 point something million raised, and it's still going. So I'm thinking it would be just really cool to see maybe some publisher interest come about of something like this. Like, hey, here's this genre that hasn't been touched on in forever. Maybe there is actually a market out there for it, and that could potentially solve some of the problems of the lack of PC-ish kind of games being out there in the mainstream. I don't know. I just think it's really interesting to see it all happen. So it hasn't had long enough to really come to fruition yet for a lot of this stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it is something that's interesting to think about, the implications that it could have, because I could definitely see that happening. Something becomes just a huge hit via that support and is maybe part of a genre or a philosophy that's dying or isn't so prevalent anymore. Maybe
if you look at stuff like Minecraft, that came out of nowhere, and now you've got people like Epic making their own kind of Minecraft game, and a bunch of these other companies supposedly have them in the works, and that was... it wasn't Kickstarter, but it was an indie thing that sort
definitely.
of made this new thing come out of nowhere. So
it makes me think of a line that Belloc says in Raiders of the Lost Ark. He says, "You and I are merely passing through history. This is history."
Wow, all right, Raiders of the Lost Ark reference there for you folks. Very nice.
I think I may have a different view on this than you guys do because I work in the industry and distribution. I'll briefly plug GOG. We do look for good games in GOG, not just classic old ones, but also we're looking for games that have that PC feel we were talking about for GOG. And one thing that is really interesting is everybody in the office, we're all gamers, and many of us have backed a variety of different Kickstarters. And so what you'll frequently see happening is we'll get around and talk about, hey, there's this new Kickstarter project that looks awesome. I've already backed it for 15 or 20 or 30 or $50, and then our biz dev team will go out and talk to these guys. Expeditions Conquistador, Legend of Eisenwald, 2 games that I backed and then told our biz dev team, hey, look at this. These guys are bringing that kind of classic feel to life, and there is definitely a call for it. An example of a game that wasn't kickstarted but did phenomenally well, Legend of Grimrock. Those guys talked about,
Yes.
I think they announced they did 600,000 units sold last year. And that's huge. And they came to a genre that no one had done anything from in 8 years. I can't think of anybody doing a first-person dungeon crawl like that since Eye of the Beholder 3. And no one's taken this and said, let's do something new and exciting with it. And they did it, and it was just, wow, a huge success for them. And I think, obviously, finding new mechanics and new exciting things to do, whether you're talking about crazy puzzlers like Puddle or like Fez, or whether you're talking about doing new things with adventure gaming, like The Walking Dead, which is a fairly casual variant of it, or stuff like Wadjet Eye does, which is very kind of retro cool.
Oh, yeah.
By doing this sort of thing, yes, there's a renaissance happening here, and it's going out in all directions. It's both trending towards more mainstream. Minecraft is a very kind of a mainstream game as far as the difficulty curve. There practically isn't one. People love it because it is go, play, do, have fun. So it is in its own way, for all that the graphics are extraordinarily old school, still a game where the graphics convey the point of the game well enough, and you can play and enjoy it for 5 minutes, and it's something cool to do. I think that whole explosion of whether people are looking, can I make a game that feels more like a PC, or can I make a game that appeals more to the mainstream audience, is very exciting, and it continues to expand. Every week I see some new, incredible, exciting thing happen.
Man, I sure am glad I randomly brought up that that extra little question, because I think your responses to that were all really, really fascinating. It's kind of giving me a lot to think about. And also, don't forget about Buzz Marketing, good old games, helping to support your interesting indie games and Kickstarter projects. Please go. Anyway, I wanna go back to sort of another point that I think might make for some fun discussion. We passed this around beforehand, and the PC Elitist guys mentioned to me that they don't have a ton of experience with this, but I'm sure they'll be able to chime in just on the interest and the idea of some of this stuff. But back in the day, right, late 80s, early 90s, one of those typical PC gaming things is the crazy alternative DRM they used to use, if you could even call it that, the old school copy protection stuff with the wheels and the red and blue text that you put the magnifying glass on, the book with a million different codes that you had to get. So I'm curious, and this time I'll start with Clint, but curious about the zaniest or the most interesting wacky DRM stuff you've seen. And Clint, I know you've got probably a million answers to this, but go ahead and toss out some interesting stuff.
I don't even know where to start. Yeah, I did a whole video on these just because I do find them interesting. I guess one of the most interesting, though, it doesn't even come necessarily from PC games, but with computers in general, was the whole lens lock thing. I don't know. It's just a little lens. It was a specific kind of prism shape. It came with like Spectrum games and Commodore 64 games in the UK predominantly, and you had a code that appeared garbled on your screen, and then you would have to take this lens out from your game, put it up to your screen, and kind of finagle it around a little bit and hope that your screen was the right size so that you could actually see this code come through. I don't know. It's just things like that. The weirdest things that they came up with to prevent people from just copying the game or making their own backups they're great. I mean, in retrospect, they're great. Oh, yeah. Don't copy the floppy. Don't copy the cassette. Those were on cassette tapes. You could copy them you could play them over the radio. Apparently, that was a way of piracy back in like the sort of Eastern European kind of things. They would play games over the radio so you could record them.
Oh, my God.
No, they would do that in the UK. They would actually, the BBC would broadcast stuff. Yeah,
That's
the BBC
awesome.
would broadcast programs for you to download, record over your radio, and then you'd get these educational programs by BBC. It was phenomenal.
That is
Wow,
awesome. Yeah.
I never even knew that was a thing. That's crazy.
So yeah, it's interesting now, but of course, that's in retrospect. I remember back then being completely just infuriated with some of these things. Like, I had an LHX manual. Friend wanted to play it, and it's like, okay, well, you have to copy this 400-page manual to be able to play it, or because I'm not giving you mine. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
you need that.
Exactly. I can't play it if you don't. So, yeah, I was painstakingly copying Yeah, poor copy machine.
I mean, I used to love the games that actually were able to tie it into something cool. Like, earlier Shepherd and Woodsie brought up some of those games, and this used to be really prevalent in the 80s and 90s of these huge lore books. And sometimes the DRM thing, they'd ask you a question of something out of the lore book, like, where is this character from? It's on page 275 of your lore book. So at least in a way,
there was one I was playing recently, Fairy Tale Adventure. You had a map that was a physical map, and it looked cool, and it had all these neat little sayings that were around the edges of the map, and you had to figure them out. And it acted as sort of an introduction to the game, because your character is all valiant and stuff. And you have these this list of, like, it's like a creed that you that you would recite to the computer to actually get in the game. It's like, need them more you'll might to quest for the light, make haste, but take heed, stern murderous deed, summon the sight. It's this long creed that you have to type in, and it asks you random parts of the creed. So that's like, your way into the valiant nature of the game. It's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely a lot more interesting than Secu-ROM or something.
Yeah.
And Trevor, I'm sure you've seen loads of these with the games you're bringing into Good Old Games and whatnot. So do you have any other sort of experiences that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I do seem to recall, and my memory may be playing a trick on me, I think Curse of the Azure Bonds had a code wheel where you were trying to line up the various curses on the wheel. And when you lined up the outer curse and the inner curse, then you got some other glyph, and then you had to click the right glyph. But mine was defective, and only half of the one on the wheel was printed because it got folded or something. So I would guess, and because I could get half of them right, I would get kicked out of the game half the time, and the other half I could then resume my game. I remember that was particularly annoying. But yes, a lot of the games. I'm sorry, what?
I was going to say, that there was some guy who had the other half that was printed, and they were hoping you two would find each other.
Yeah.
Very possibly. A lot of the games we sell, we've had to do the cracks that take out those particular features of the game simply because, we could give you a README text to print out and then, know the word to type in when. But that's still not very user-friendly. So we have had to do basically what people in the BBS scene back in the day, back when you used to download wares over your telephone connection and hope that your parents wouldn't pick up the phone,
What are you talking about? I never did anything like that.
So the
that's one thing I was wondering. Do you guys have like a team of crackers at GOG? That's awesome.
We don't have a team of crackers. We do have build masters whose job it is to make sure the game is run, and that's as far as I'll go with that.
Dude, I'm picturing them like headhunting all the top like piracy experts.
Calling up the old lines for the BBSs. Hey, do you remember this guy? He cracked this game back in like '92. He was great.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm sure it's completely legitimate. GoodOldGames.com, people, check it out. Any other sort of funny stories there?
On the slightly more nefarious route of actual, like, serious DRM, as opposed to this kind of copy protection measures, which are not. They're looking back on them, they're quaint and retro and fun. I do think that there continues to be a point of difficulty with content creators and the people who consume their media, because of course, and GOG sells games, we don't want you to download them for free, of course not. But we do understand that your competition with your gamers isn't for other gaming websites, it's for pirates. So how you can compete with the pirates is to make things as easy as you can. And likewise, I think games, the reason why we all play the demos of all these games and maybe didn't play the full games themselves, a lot of the places you go, here's the demo level of One Must Fall 2097. I think I played 50, 60, 100 hours of that little fighter game and played the demo only. And on the same website I downloaded the demo from, the full version was there. And you had to download it and crack it or deal with the manual or whatever. And that was more of a pain. So I played the demo because it was easy. And I think a lot of us who played the shareware games as they were passed around had the same experience where we played them and then maybe didn't get the full version either because the full version was difficult to acquire where we were, or because the difficulties of dealing with the copy protection can sometimes just be like, I'm done with this.
Yeah, sure. Not to mention, I mean, this is a broader point about demos that we've talked about in the show before, but those shareware versions were sometimes so robust that you didn't necessarily feel like the need to play. You go, oh well, that episode of Doom was really cool. I wonder what game to play next. Like you didn't really necessarily feel the compulsion to get the full version.
I loved the Half-Life demo that just had a standalone little story that you just played through that had nothing to do with the actual game. It wasn't an excerpt from the game. It was just, here's a demo that we made, and then the game is just more of that.
Wow, really? I never even played that, so I didn't. What was it, like some different characters and everything, or what?
Well, it was just it kind of felt like they just pulled out a random level. But after playing through Half-Life 6 times, I know that area does not exist in Half-Life. And they just had some cool story elements and like some, some scenes for you to watch. And I mean, it was just kind of like, this is our game, but but it was not part of the main game.
Yeah, that is neat. PC game demos are a fascinating thing, but I think I want to save that for a future roundtable or something, because we still have a few things to get through, and I've had you guys sitting here for the better part of 2 hours, so probably best to not toss in another point about that, even though it is really interesting, and I would be curious at a later date or something to think about, like some fun you've had with some of those demos. I have sort of a couple more things I want to throw out there. One point that came up earlier, not necessarily the point itself so much that these examples were used as a part of other questions, but there are a lot of genres, especially among PC gaming, that were a lot hotter or a lot more popular back then, that have either sort of died out today or have gotten a lot less popular, like those space sims or like that first-person dungeon crawl. So I want to maybe toss around a little open-ended question about how you feel about some of that stuff. That is to say, some of these genres that you personally would just really like to see come back, and some of this stuff that's died out that you maybe aren't so attached to and are not too sad about it dying out. So I'll kick it over to Woodsie first.
I can't, you know what? I feel like the gaming industry right now, or PC gaming, is very robust, where you can kind of find almost anything. The only thing I can't find is, like what you said, a space or fantasy simulator, like a MechWarrior, a good one, like a MechWarrior or an X-Wing. So
was Evocron Mercenary not one of those?
I'd say it was. I mean, that and what was the one Clint mentioned earlier that you were looking forward to?
Star Citizen, yeah.
Yeah, Star Citizen. I mean, there's certainly not too many of them, though. I mean, that's definitely, we're seeing maybe
I'm
one.
I'm excited to see that genre return.
We basically want Firefly to be a video game.
That's true.
Awesome.
Although I would note that they've been making the X series for forever, and that is Space Sim. That just seems like only the really, because it's X series is kind of like EVE Online, but offline. So it's a space sim with a lot of spreadsheets.
That's a brilliant way of describing those games.
My personal game style, I love that sims exist. I love that flight sims are there because I feel like it raises the cap of what games can accomplish. So I always want them pushing higher, but I personally don't have a knack for them. These very overly complex. I like that little middle ground where it's not quite a sim. It's not quite an arcade. It's that X-Wing-ish area where there's just enough for me to really kind of grip and put my teeth into, but not where I'm printing out spreadsheets.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like, I prefer something like Freelancer to something like X personally, but yeah, that's me. Maybe I'm not elite enough, but there you have it.
I mean, that comes down to a taste thing. I love Sims. I love watching people play Sims. I love seeing people have their Sim pits with all their screens and so cool. I would never do it, but hey, I'm glad it exists.
I love watching people with no free time and a lot of dispensable income.
What about you other guys? Clint, Trevor, is there anything that I guess Clint, you want to see more of the flight sim stuff because you brought it up earlier, but anything you want to see more of or are glad is dead, basically?
Oh yeah, said FMV games. I'm glad those are dead.
Oh come on, you didn't like?
Oh come on, Tex Murphy was
you didn't
phenomenal.
Like the Seventh Guest. I mean,
Seventh Guest is awesome. Buy them all on GOG. Oh.
Yeah, buy them all.
There are some decent ones, but for the most part, I'm sorry, I just can't.
Yeah, no,
even it's just too much. I mean, the puzzles distract from the awesomeness of the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is distracting from the puzzles for me. I mean, it's classic.
But what about the Journeyman Project 2? Surely you must agree that game is excellent.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, and I did back the new Tex Murphy because I don't know, Tex Murphy was cool, but
I think it's safe to say that full motion video game, that they can be great, but they could go so bad. They could get so bad.
I want to point out
to go bad than it is to go good. I think.
I'm gonna have a gaming hipster moment because you're not looking forward to that game because it already came out. Yeah, it's an old game. Available on goodoldgames.com, isn't it?
Is it? No, I don't think 2 is. I think 3 is, not 2.
All right. Journeyman Project 3, not as good as 2 in my opinion, but all right. Anything else, Trevor? What about you?
Games that I would love to see done more. Someone needs to do MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries over again, because no one's ever made a game that good.
Right. Okay. So, just somehow acquire the license. Re-release game.
I mean, okay, you can spin it a little bit differently. You could do it with the Star Siege universe, which is also a lot of fun. Earth Siege 1, Earth Siege 2, Star Siege, Cyberstorm 2. Those were all great games. I wouldn't mind having another Cyberstorm, come to think of it. That was a fun game, too. Games I'm happy are dead. Well, the games that I wish were dead aren't. The genre that I really have a strong disliking for is the missed adventure games. And that's a terrible thing to say. We sell them. But I hate them.
So when you head over to goodoldgames.com later on, don't buy Myst or any of those. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same. I always found those games like a little bit too obtuse for their own good. Like I just could never figure it out. And I know some people like that about those games. Like, wow, I could play Myst for 10 years, but I'm not that person.
No, I recently bought Masterpiece Edition on GOG just the other day because I'm working on a review for it, and I'm struggling to even just get anywhere, and to even go through the walkthrough is kind of a pain. I'm just like, yeah, I don't care enough. I just don't.
Yeah, it's just absurd. Like I was never able to accomplish anything in that game, and to think that anyone was boggles my mind that they were able to get through that without any walkthrough or anything, because it was just nuts.
No, they sold 6 million copies, and I bet 100 people actually finished the game.
Yeah, if that. I mean, the only reason I even picked it up at the time, like, I didn't know much about it because it was sort of pre-internet days, but it was so ubiquitous, I kind of felt like, well, I have to play Myst. Everybody plays Myst. And then I'm sitting there in front of the computer like, what the hell is this? Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
I think that if I could just chime in real quick before you move on.
Go ahead.
There is one genre I'd like to see come back, and one that I think is prevalent but not done very well. And I think having the discussion about whether a genre should come back kind of implies that there are more than one developer kind of competing for the genre, because there are some developers who only make very niche or enthusiast games. And so the genre's alive, yeah, sure, but there's only one person making it. And if you don't like it, then it's also sometimes hard to find. I would like to see naval warfare and or submarine warfare in a modern sense. I know that Cold War era submarine games could be certainly fun, but I think keep continuing to make games based on historical conflicts can get old, even though killing Nazis never gets old to me personally. But I think that like a more modern day naval and or sub warfare game would be really interesting. But again, how many developers are going to jump out and make that? It might just be two.
I think modern naval warfare, they haven't done it. They have no idea how it would end up.
Exactly. It's kind of like the same modern aviation, like modern air war. We don't really have many air conflicts anymore. I don't think we will anytime soon.
Modern air warfare is pretty much a one-sided ass-kicking contest of America versus whatever poor bastards flying against us.
And if we want to make game, I would play it.
I admit I don't know anything about air warfare, but I always hear that these games like Ace Combat and Hawks and stuff are ridiculous because in real life these planes are shooting at each other from like they can't even see each other. So I can imagine a game that's actually realistic modern air warfare. You'd just be like 100 miles away shooting bombs and missiles, like never seeing anything.
I'm pretty sure that a realistic modern sub warfare involves you nuking China, and then it's done.
Yeah, pretty much. Just
sound like excellent games, actually.
North Korea. I also think that a genre that is people are making games for it, stealth action. But to me, it depends on how you define stealth action. But I'm much more of a classicist. I would love for a spy game to be made where the point of the game is stealth and tradecraft, not technology. I want the point of the game to be you have to outsmart your enemy, not figure the one way to put a sticky cam on the wall. And I just feel like the original Metal Gear Solid games I thought were very fun, but those I didn't play them on PC. The first 2 or 3 Splinter Cell games I thought were fun, but over time, especially now with Conviction, I just feel like stealth action is not that. Assassin's Creed 3 is a big one. Let's just plop an assassin into the Revolutionary War and see how that turns out for us. To me, a true stealth action game, the point of it should be you play the entire game, no one saw you, and no one knew you were there. Like, that should be the ultimate goal, and anything less of that is a degree of difficulty. But I think genre has been really – I think people are trying to do more with it than what it is. So, but I think that, again, I'm just a curmudgeonly classicist when it comes to stealth action.
The Thief-like genre.
Yeah.
You know, because that Thief nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
And
I keep hearing about Thief 4, but
I was going to say, Thief 4, what in the world?
After Thief 3, the whole idea of Thief 4 scares me.
They could do it right.
I guess – yeah, I mean, I like Thief 3, but I know it gets a lot of hate because it was one of the first that started to maybe step a little more towards the broad-based appeal, being a little simpler, having more specific solutions to things and whatnot. But, man, I would love a new Thief game. That's a fantastic series.
What about if Michael Bay made a Thief game?
That's actually where you...
Did you just say Michael Bay making a Thief game?
He make it real subtle, I'm sure.
Real subtle.
That's where That's where I get my hate. I call myself Woodsy because of the Woodsy lore. That's where it comes from.
I was going to mention the way it should work, just like the old games. You go in and out, you steal stuff, you don't get seen, you're perfectly stealthy, and then as you walk away from like the mansion or whatever, it just explodes like random.
Little did you know you planted C4 after you sold stuff.
Yes.
And then it's like you in slow motion.
And Megan Fox is there too.
There you go.
Sorry, Trevor, you're trying to say something. What's up?
I would note that Thief 4 has been in development for about as long as Alien Colonial Marines, so maybe we should
or Duke Nukem Forever.
Oh God.
Oh well.
4
all right.
Add numbers. We need.
The Chinese consider 4 a very evil number.
All right, Thief Shadow Master will be something like that. Yeah, as I feel obliged to bring up sports games because I know that's Adam's big thing on PC, and whenever we talk about stuff that's died on PC, he always mentions how it sucks because you used to have actually pretty ubiquitous sports stuff on the PC, but you hardly see anything these days, and what you do see tends to be more like simulation, like Football Manager type games. So I know that a lot of people are upset about that. But as for me personally, the one thing that I would want to see more and why I was very happy for the success of Legend of Grimrock. I really like those like wizardry and might and magic style games, so I would really love to see that genre come back big. So in the back of my mind, I'm eternally hopeful that maybe someone will pick up on that and go, wow, let's just start making those games again. That'd be a dream come true for me.
Well, Magica is simple wizard perfection.
Magica is completely brilliant and an amazing troll game to just kill your friends over and over again.
Exactly. Real quick, Phil, regarding Adam, I know he and I talked about this before with regard to sports games. The sole reason why I played sports games exclusively on console for years was simply because of the control scheme. Because I tried playing Madden on a keyboard and mouse, and no thank you. But I play FIFA now, FIFA 13, on my computer. Absolutely love it, but with a gamepad. I play with my 360 controller. So for me,
it's same with
scheme.
Yeah, I remember playing with my Microsoft Sidewinder, which, man, that was a really great controller. But yeah, playing Madden on a keyboard is a nightmare. Like, there's just no way that's gonna work. So,
one of the real nightmares is testing Madden on the PC. I worked at EA for a while as a tester, and that was one of my.
That's right. How could I forget that?
Oh, that was terrible.
Remember when controllers used to have that turbo button? Trevor, hey?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you know the real bastard, I'm not sure if they still ship the game or not, but NASCAR on PC, holy crap. They took me off the team because all I would do is hit the wall immediately.
you hit turbo immediately as soon as the race started. That's why.
Exactly. Turbo means fast. I want to win.
It's turbo. Like, what's the problem? I don't understand. All right, guys. We got sort of one last wrap up thing because it's been fantastic having you guys here, and I do hope that we can do something like this again in the future. But I don't want to leave you guys all trapped with me for 9 hours. So the last thing I'd like to go around with is just a personal list of your favorite games in the PC. Say a top 5 or a top 3 or whatever. But I want to just go around and have each person mention just a few of their favorite things on PC. So Woodsy, you start us off.
It took a while for me to narrow down the list, but I have to go with System Shock 2 as number 1.
Yeah.
Half-Life 2, Half-Life just below it. StarCraft series 1 or 2, whichever. X-Wing, and then Monkey Island. That's my top 5 favorites.
Very nice. What about you, Shepherd?
I'm gonna go top 6, and again, this is hard.
Unacceptable.
I know, sorry. I'll go top 5.5, and I'll only say half of the
Go
time.
ahead. 6. I will make an exception and allow you to
Thank you very much. This, for me, it's so hard, and I'm sure you all know, it's so hard to narrow it down, but really the deciding factor for me was the effect that these games had on how I feel about PC gaming and gaming in general. So in no particular order, Crysis, the first one, TIE Fighter, Minecraft, Portal, World of Warcraft, and PlanetSide 2.
All right. Well, yeah, I'd say not too much to complain about there. Now, Clint, I guess for you it would be your top 4 after that lawnmower game. So what would they?
Yeah, lawnmower is probably not on any particular list except things that I had to play because I didn't have anything else. But if I had to pick a few, it would definitely be Duke Nukem 3D at the top. Spent forever just modding that game and playing it for years. Followed by Out of This World. And probably Half-Life 2. Anything beyond a top 3, though, I don't know. Probably SimCity or The Sims or something, something like that. I've spent more time playing SimCity games than just about anything.
Yeah, I always have that problem, too. I mean, I have a lot of games that I hold in very high regard, and whenever somebody asks me to name a top 5, it's always 5 different games. Because I have, maybe 1 or 2 that are always there and another 20 or 30 that could go in or out depending on, what I had for lunch that day or something.
Exactly.
All right, and Trevor, what about you?
Yeah, that's pretty applicable to me as well. I have probably 30 games that I would just, if the world was ending, I would want to take those. But I'll pick one from each of the genres I like best, and we'll go with that. Space Sim is TIE Fighter. For Stompy Mech Sim, it is Mech Warrior 2 Mercenaries. For adventure game, I have a really weird one that no one else likes. It's the Gate World series, Gate World and Gate World 2 Homeworld. A bizarre parser graphical mix game that I just had way too much fun with, and it angers people that I don't like Monkey Island as well. I like that game, but whatever. For RPG, I'd have to go with Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 put together with BG Tutu, because that game that's cheating, I know. And then for FPS, it's Portal.
For FPS, Portal. All right. I can't. It's all nice lists, all varied things. Not anything in there that I can really make a case disagreeing with. Not that I would want to. So, no, that game sucks. Yeah, I mean, same thing for me. Maybe System Shock. System Shock 2 is always kind of on top. As for other things, I don't know, Deus Ex, Witcher, maybe the Warcraft 1 and 2. Planescape Torment, Quake, Doom, that kind of thing. That's 5 or 6 games or something. So let's go with those.
I have a question for Clint, if I could. Clint, I'm also a big SimCity fan. Have you played Cities XL, and if so, what do you think of it?
Cities XL is it's interesting as far as it works. The problem I have with it is it slows down to unplayable levels before too long. It's terribly optimized. I think it's just a very badly made game for making cities. It's interesting for making screenshots. Makes really nice screenshots, but otherwise, no. It's as a city builder, it leaves quite a bit to be desired. They haven't improved it from like the cities or the City Life and then just regular Cities XL. They just released Cities XL Platinum recently, but they didn't fix any of the performance issues, so I can't really play it for very long. Your city gets to 100,000 or so, and you're at slideshow levels. So
yeah, that game's I have I think 2012 Cities XL, and yeah, same story. I'm looking forward to the new SimCity because those games are a neat modern interpretation, but a lot of problems.
Where's my Simcopter? Where did that game go?
Yeah, I know. We need a new
come on
Simcopter, Streets of SimCity. We need those again for the new SimCity.
Sim Zombie.
Yeah, I want to know what it's like to simulate zombie life.
They could maybe bring that. I mean, why doesn't EA do that? Just bring back all the weird Sim spin-off games, because a lot of those were great. Not all of them,
Sim Ant was not a particular favorite of mine.
Yeah, Sim Ant wasn't very good. What was Sim Earth like? I remember that existed, but not anything about it.
You kind of simulated the whole idea of the Gaia theory, where Earth is like a big single organism, so it really wasn't particularly great either. It seemed like more of a teaching aid than anything, and considering the documentation it came with, I'd say that's pretty accurate.
It was like Populous if you couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Wow. Right. Wow. And on that note, so for the third time, I guess. But thanks so much to everybody for being on. As usual, we're gonna have relevant links for all these guys in the description. But you can find Clint on Lazy Game Reviews on YouTube. You can find Woodsie and Shepherd at the PC Elitist on YouTube, and obviously you can find all of Trevor's stuff at goodoldgames.com. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, goodoldgames.com.
Actually, GOG.com.
All right, GOG.com.